Hey, we're talking with Mark Collinsworth again, an expert in finances and somebody who's been making some pretty accurate calls about how the stock market will be going. Mark, with all the dire predictions by some prognosticators, both well known and not so well known, many of them saying that a big stock market crash is ahead. What do you think?
I don't think so right now. Now speaking, years and years in the future, yes, the Federal Reserve has set the stage for probably another bubble to be popped, but that's years down the road. In the more near to intermediate term, I don't think you'll have a crash. You'll have your normal pullbacks, your 5 and 6%, but I think those will be buying opportunities. And of course, again, down the road, that's when your critical mass is going to happen.
Well, what about people that are saying inflation is going to be a killer and that's going to hit us pretty soon and pretty severely? Is that, again, alarmist stuff?
That's just alarmist stuff. I think they're using outdated material to apply to a more of a modern era. Give you two key components on why I think inflation is not going to be a problem. First component is the people are being paid not to go back to work. That's causing a logistics problem. So to think of it this way, if you have 10 people wanting to buy 10 widgets and you have one person making 5 widgets, well, the demand of the 10 outweighs the 5 that's being produced. But hire one more person, now you're making 10 widgets. People still want 10 widgets, so demand and supply are equal. Hire 3 people, you now are producing 15 widgets to a demand of 10 widgets, and now you actually have deflation.
But what about all the talk about how a lot of these jobs have dried up permanently? And although some people may be returning to jobs they had, for other people, those jobs have disappeared and perhaps permanently. So won't that have a big effect?
Well, those people that have lost their jobs permanently, that's going to be more deflationary than inflationary. They'll basically become, kind of wards of the state. They'll start collecting, some kind of welfare program. And welfare programs tend to be more, in the United States at least, tend to be more disinflationary than inflationary.
So you think that the stock market, well, before I ask you that, there's also a lot of alarm about the crash that they say is coming, and a lot of people asking me and other people whether they should go to cash, whether they should cash out of their stocks and go to cash. What do you think?
I would say no. Again, you're going to have your normal, 5-6% pullbacks, maybe even a 10% pullback. But right now, the Fed is pumping so much liquidity into the stock market. The stock market really has no place to go long term but up until it reaches that critical mass of valuation.
And when will that be?
Well, going back and looking at the dot-com bubble, when the Federal Reserve cut interest rates during the dot-com bubble and 9/11, it took almost 7 years for the housing bubble to get to the point to where it basically imploded. And even then, it required the Federal Reserve to pull the proverbial punch bowl away from the housing market to actually cause it to implode. So right now, we're still looking at probably several years away. To add to that, the Federal Reserve has put 20% of the U.S. economy's GDP onto its balance sheet, which is about $7 trillion. So they still have a long ways to go on adding more to their balance sheet. To really drive the point home, in Japan right now, Japan's central bank's balance sheet is about $8.5 trillion US dollars, but the Japanese economy, their entire economy, is only valued at about $5.2 trillion.
But then where is all this alarm coming from? Is this just internet stuff and TV gurus that are trying to gather ratings by being alarmist, or is there anything to it at all?
I think a lot of it is they're using outdated material. So, if this was like, let's say 1940 or 1950, yes, we probably would have inflation when we were more of an industrialized economy and we actually manufactured parts that went up in value with inflation. Today, we're more service oriented. So we don't actually really make anything. We make software, we make computer programs, we make things of that nature, cloud software. So those are really intangible substances. Now, flip over to Japan. Japan basically has deflation or disinflation in their economy. By them devaluing their currency, it makes Chinese goods less pricey here in the United States. So essentially, China is exporting deflation to the United States.
Yeah, well, that's another factor. People talking about China eating our lunch and becoming the dominant economic and military power, a world power replacing the U.S.'s role that emerged after the Second World War. With China surging and emerging, how is that going to affect our economy here and the stock market?
Going forward, China is going to continue to wear away at the industrial, what's left of the industrial empire of the United States. China will keep eroding away from it. China's already basically taking technologies away from the United States and actually even improving upon it. So we're slowly losing our competitive nature against China. And with China, with a billion population, they really have a lot of room to really grow.
So, but that won't have an immediate effect causing a crash in the stock market anytime soon.
No, that's still years away. The Chinese, in the United States likes to think in planning processes. They like to think 1 quarter to 2 quarters into the future. The Chinese, they like to think, 1 decade to 2 decades out in their planning structure. So that's a huge advantage long term.
So how does the U.S. counter the destructive trend of China? I mean, is there any way to stop it, reverse at this point? Because again, the axiom is it's too late to close the barn door after the horses run away. So is the U.S. helpless to reverse the trend of the ascendancy of China to our detriment?
Yes and no. Is it reversible? Yes, but here's where the real problem comes in at. The entire problem of why China has gotten such a huge lead over us is because our politicians, that elite group of people, have cut so many deals with China and given so many advantages to them, while at the same time disadvantaging the United States. To give you an example, here in the United States, when you go buy, let's say, an iPhone, you're basically paying that person. But when you buy the iPhone, you're paying for someone's minimum wage. You're paying for someone's health insurance. Over in China, they don't have to have a health insurance program. They don't have to have a minimum wage. So they're working, in the proverbial sweatshops making pennies. Right. That automatically makes their prices much cheaper than the United States.
Yeah, but didn't they give China exclusive mineral rights for the world, supposedly? And how is that going to affect things?
Well, if China really decides they want to, they could actually cut us off from some of those rare earth minerals. Even though the United States has its own rare earth minerals, China seems to have a large plethora of them. So if China decided to cut us off of those, that would really hurt our semiconductor market and our iPhone market.
Well, with this renewed emphasis on China becoming more than just a friendly competitor, not that I believe Biden will necessarily do anything about it, but I mean, if there are moves made to curb China, then what happens? Isn't it becomes tit for tat, and nobody wins, or are we the biggest loser in that kind of a war?
I think we're really kind of positioned ourselves to become a loser in an economic war. With one of the worst problems to it is no one really wants to stand up to China. You heard for years that China has devalued their currency to make their goods automatic, to make cheaper goods already that much more cheaper. And the United States has done really nothing to really try to stop that currency manipulation. Trump tried it, but people didn't like the way he was going about it, even though it was working.
Yeah, well, what about Trump's move on tariffs? It seemed to cause short-term damage to some industries and jobs here, but it was a strategy that, if they were in place long enough, it would drive China away from American jobs.
Correct. Short term is a little bit painful, but longer term has been great. The reason why is in China currently, they're using more modernized machines. So their machines are much more efficient on cutting steel, designing steel, processing steel. A lot of the steel manufacturing plants we have in the United States are still working on using machines and technology that was used in the 1970s. So if the tariffs have stayed in place long enough, that extra cash flow coming into the United States would have given given the steel industry a chance to remodernize, get better equipment, train people, and even put money into research and development to even make better technologies for making steel and steel machinery.
Now, well, when Trump was trying to fight China, I mean, it seemed like he didn't have enough time to do it. But in terms of the stock market, now, even though it may do well and not crash anytime soon, that's not going to really generate any more jobs, because it was like during the tax cut under Trump. What happened there is that the corporation just bought back their own stock. So if you owned a nice chunk of stock, you did well, but that doesn't mean that more jobs are being generated. Aren't we going through the same phase now? The stock market will continue to remain high, but it doesn't really descend into any kind of jobs.
Correct. A rising stock market really doesn't create jobs. What really creates jobs is making United States products competitive enough to compete with European companies and Chinese companies. But for some reason, politicians don't want to do that. They get, these mysterious black box donations they get for, hundreds of millions of dollars. Where does that come from? Are they getting paid by China? They're buddy with these foreign countries and companies.
Oh, so, go ahead.
I would say the U.S. worker is really at a disadvantage because an elite group of people basically run the country, write the laws, and they run stuff. And when you write a law, if you're the one writing a law, are you going to write a law that hurts you personally? Well, of course not. You're going to write a law that benefits you directly, indirectly, as well as benefits your friends that are also contributing to your campaigns and such. And as long as that system stays in place, you will never, ever be able to get an economic leg up on those elite groups or on foreign countries.
Well, this is what I'm saying, although maybe it's just a matter of time. You're saying it won't happen anytime soon, 1 or 2 years down the road at least. But what I'm saying is, since this is really an illusion that there's more wealth being created and everybody's doing well, those with a lot of stock are doing well. But since it's not creating more jobs, will that in itself not lead to a crash, and maybe sooner than a year or two down the road?
Well, I think really the thing with the stock market, a lot of people always think that job creation helps the stock market. It really doesn't. Really the key ingredient to that really drives the stock market is really liquidity. It's being able to borrow money on margin. It's able to issue debt at very low interest rates. It's profitable to go out and borrow money at 1% and then take those billions of dollars you borrow at 1% and go back and buy your stock of your company to drive the stock price even higher. So those are the things that are driving the stock market right now. To kind of give you a better example, there's what's called the Buffett indicator. Made famous, of course, by Warren Buffett. It basically compares the value of the economy. So right now, our GDP, we have about a $22 trillion economy, and it compares that to the value of the stock market. We have the stock market is currently valued at 44 trillion. The theory is, if the economy is really businesses, the business value of companies and the economy should always trade fairly close to each other. Well, right now, the stock values are here, the economy is here, and everything in between the two is nothing but air being held up by the Federal Reserve's liquidity and the greed of humans wanting to make money in the stock market.
Well, that's kind of what I'm saying, Mark, that sense. No jobs, there isn't much job growth. It's all concentrated in the stock market. Now, if you're not in on stocks in a significant way, then you're not prosperous. And that applies to tens of millions of workers across the US. So, I mean, won't that have a significant, perhaps drastic effect, and sooner than we think? Because with the working class and middle class being less and less prosperous, how would the stock market stay prosperous?
Well, I'm going to give you a real world example of this, which is I always find kind of fascinating. You kind of see where the two stories kind of come together. When I was growing up, I'd ask my grandmother what she thought about, the Great Depression and the stock market crash. Mm-hmm. And she said that she didn't know there was a stock market crash, and she didn't know there was a depression in the 1930s because she was already living in a depression in the early 1920s.
Right.
And you can kind of see that now. In the 1920s, the stock market went up hundreds and hundreds of percent, but you had people like my grandmother and grandfather who were basically dirt poor, couldn't find any work, but yet the stock market continued to go up because the Federal Reserve kept pumping liquidity into the system. And I think you'll see that same thing here at some point will happen, is that the Federal Reserve can only pump so much liquidity into the market, and they still have a lot of room to pump a lot more. They're going to drive the stock market to such astronomical values that all that air in between the fair value of a business and the current stock valuations gets to such critical mass that liquidity can't hold it up anymore, and the valuations come crashing down, which is my long-term concern. I believe with all this liquidity, you could see the Federal Reserve drive the S&P 500 up to 7,000 or 8,000 over the next several years. The bad part about that is stocks always revert back to their fair value. And right now, fair value for the S&P 500 is about 2,000.
Really? Well, if this is the case, when it does happen, and you're saying what, that's at least a year or two down the road?
I think you're going to see, just like during the Great Depression, when the Federal Reserve started pumping money into the system, that started back here right at the end of World War I to jumpstart the economy. It took almost 10 to 12 years for that to actually finally reach critical mass. And look how much the stock market ran up in that 10 to 12 years.
So again, your prediction is, in terms of a market crash, you think it is coming, but it's not coming until when?
I don't think it's going to come for about another 7 or 8 years.
Oh,
and that 7 or 8, yeah, and that 7 or 8 years is where the Fed's really going to shoot itself in the foot. They're going to drive stock values up so extremely high that when everything does come crashing back down, an 80% drop in the stock market, that alone will do the same thing that happened in 1929. It will create another depression if stocks drop that much, because think about it, companies like Tesla only stays in business because it issues more stock to stay in business. If Tesla stock drops 80%, I don't think a lot of people are going to want to buy Tesla stock, even if they have the money at that point to buy it. Companies like Tesla go out of business because their lifeline is rising stock prices, and if stock prices aren't rising, their businesses fail to exist.
All right, so clarification here. You're saying there could be a pullback or a correction within a year or two, but the crash is 7 or 8 years down the road, correct?
Correct. I think it's still 7 or 8 years down the road, because just like, I use another example, back here during the dot-com bubble and the 9/11, the Fed pumped all this money, all this extra liquidity into the stock market. It took almost 8 years for the stock market at that point to reach, or the housing market to reach critical mass. It took 8 years then.
All right, now what happens when that crash does come? Should people go to cash? And if they go to cash, will the dollar be worth anything?
I think what you'll probably see then, when the next gigantic crash occurs, which is still, 7 or 8 years away, I think the Federal Reserve will realize they're in such a tight boat, they will purposely try to because they've used up pretty much all their ammunition on the liquidity side. The last weapon they really have to jumpstart the economy is really to massively devalue the currency, to try to make our products cheaper in China and Europe. And to devalue the currency, you're going to have to drive it down a long, long ways. And that's where your currency wars, I think, will break out at that point.
And who will win?
Ooh, that's basically who can stay in the game the longest.
Well, what's the betting, us or China?
If the United States doesn't get its A game on and get it on really, really fast, China right now at this stage, I'd bet my money on China.
Really? Now, also in terms of devaluing the currency, what's the relationship between that and inflation and interest rates?
Oh, well, the dollar used to, back in the old days, back in the 1930s, we were attached to the gold standard. So if you had $1 worth of, if you had $1 in your pocket, the Federal Reserve had to have $1 of gold to be able to print that $1. So there was an even match for match. But when the Great Depression happened, they couldn't print unlimited amounts of money because they were fixed to how much money they could print in relation to gold. So they took us off the gold standard, and then they started printing money unlimited. So essentially what you have is gold or hard assets actually have a true value to them, whereas the dollars that you have in your pocket really essentially all those pieces, those dollars are just simply pieces of paper that the government says, hey, you can use this as a medium of exchange for goods and services. And that's really the only thing that gives the dollar its value is the government saying that it has value.
When the Great Depression does come, the second Great Depression, which you're predicting 7, 8 years down the road, do we recover or do we permanently become a second-class nation economically, militarily, et cetera, et cetera? Will there be a recovery as there was the last time after the 1929 crash? Or will that be it and China ascends to world domination?
Well, the good thing about that is, yes, I think we will recover as we've always recovered. You know, the U.S. economy has actually had multiple depressions over the last 200 years. The Great Depression was just the one that just happened to be the biggest. It was the biggest of all of the depressions. So we will recover from it like we have all the others. And what I think it will really come down to long term is who has the military might. Like you saw during the 1930s, you saw the rise of Adolf Hitler, Mussolini, the Japanese Empire, and such. Those things happen during depressions. And I think the key thing that will keep the United States on top is we're really good at making weapon systems. We might not make great clothes. We might not make great baseball hats. Shoot, we can't even make a really good car. But one thing we can make a missile that can blow everything in the world up.
But China has similar weaponry now, does it not? Enough where the United States will not necessarily win an engagement with China.
There are some things that the United States actually has that actually gives them an advantage. One, the bulk of the Chinese population is actually located within 100 miles of the coastline of the country. If you go past 100 miles of the coastline, it's really nothing but desert. That works great if you specialize in tank warfare. You put your tanks out there in that desert, you can just bombard the living daylights out of those cities as much as you want. That's one. We make some of the best tanks in the world. The second thing is our submarine fleet. You put our submarine fleet off the coast of China, they won't get a single product, a single piece of food or anything they need outside that country to be brought into that country. And then the third part, because they do have such a large population, and I actually learned this going through one of my military tactics class and strategy classes in case we ever got in a conflict with China, is the United States is already prepared to dump billions of gallons of pesticides on the rice fields to essentially starve the Chinese people out.
Well, but there's others that say now China is reaching such a stage militarily that unless we go to all-out nuclear war with them, which I don't think we want to do, there's no way we could contain them in a land war or with other weaponry because they've beefed up their military. They now, the way I understand it, they now have the largest navy. The ships are not on par with most of ours, but the numbers are there, especially in the South China Sea. And these other weapons being developed, a lot of them are ripoffs from our technology, but these are substantial military development. So it's not going to be an easy war as I see it, unless you go an all-out nuclear war, and that's too risky for either side. Yes?
Well, yes and no, but again, going back to the key military concept here, if you put your tanks in the desert and you cut off supplies coming in that way, you put your submarine fleet off the coast to prevent supplies coming in that way, and then you dump all these pesticides to kill the rice fields, which rice is the main food supply in China. Based on some of the studies I've actually seen from some of my friends and stuff, if you can destroy 89 to 90% of the Chinese food supply, the country will run out of food within 7 days.
How do we put all our tanks over there?
Out of our tanks?
How do we put all of our tanks in their desert?
Oh, you do the same thing we did in Desert Storm. You basically fly them over on airplanes and drop them out of the back of the C-130s.
China won't shoot down those planes?
Well, they'll try to, but that's one of the interesting things is the United States makes some really, really great weapon systems. China would have a really, really hard time on trying to shoot down the U.S. planes, not to mention You saw this basically. I can tell you another story. When Ronald Reagan got in all that trouble of selling U.S. missile systems to Iraq during the 1980s, that was really a brilliant move because nobody knew that those missile systems were actually programmed to not shoot down U.S. fighter jets. So during the Iraqi Gulf War, when they were shooting U.S. missiles at U.S. airplanes, those U.S. missile systems recognized the microchip signatures in those planes, and they turned off and disengaged. And then the Iraqis had a 5-ton missile falling back from 2 miles above them back onto their targets.
Yeah. Well, I mean, I know we've used tricks in the past, but I mean, China is also becoming extremely good at technology and technological tricks. But here's something else, Mark. In terms of challenging China, our economy is so entangled with theirs now, and the special interests and the big multinational corporations are all making money off of China, and they're not about to change that, even if they're gutting the U.S. and eventually leading us to our own doom. They don't care because the upfront money is so good. Then when they milk the cow dry of the U.S., they move on to the Chinese market itself and other developing nations. So what I'm saying is, even if we wanted to take them on militarily to contain them, I don't think the powers that be would allow that because of our economic interdependence with China. How do you see it?
Correct. One of the big things they're going to have to, if they really want to fix the problems of China, the current political system that we have, or more importantly, the current people that are running our political system, those people need to be just removed from office because they sit here and keep on bending over and catering to the Chinese and not catering to the people that actually elected them.
Yeah, but considering the power that these people have, and considering their connections to politicians whose campaigns are funded by these corporate donations and who are kept looking good to the general public because the mainstream media and especially social media is complicit in making them look good and remaining in power. How do you change that? It's so locked in now that there's no way to remove these people that are doing damage to the U.S. the way I see it.
You're correct on that. And that kind of brings me to the second point. We're talking about a major economic upheaval coming in the next, 7 or 8 years. The reason why Adolf Hitler and Mussolini rose to power was because of those same economic upheavals. It wouldn't surprise me when the second Great Depression occurs in the United States that you see something similar here in the United States to where the working class people have finally had enough and basically overthrow or make dramatic changes to the current political system that we have.
Well, what happened in the Great Depression is when Roosevelt came in, he adopted some of the radical social programs that were rejected previously. And he's able to do that because the U.S. was in such dire straits. So you see the same possibility occurring in the second Great Depression that's coming in 7 or 8 years.
Correct. And even speaking on the Great Depression, I'm sure you've heard of what was called the business coup.
Yeah.
During the Depression, where there was actually this plot, and of course it's still debatable if this was real or just something that was made up, that there was actually a very well organized group of people, billionaires, whatever you want to call them, that was actually in-depth planning on actually causing a coup to overthrow Roosevelt and the current political system because the U.S. economy was in such dire straits. So you could see that happen in the Great Depression too.
Yeah, as a matter of fact, they try to entice one of the main generals at the time to get involved, and he rejected it. But there was a plot afoot, and it might have succeeded. I mean, considering what was at stake for both sides, for the entrenched privilege with all the money, and for the workers who were desperate. So that could have gone either way.
Correct. And that general, I think it was his name was General Smedley. That was the general that was supposed to lead the coup, and they think that's why the coup didn't occur. And General Smedley, by the way, actually was a Congressional Medal of Honor winner in World War I. A lot of people think the only reason that coup fell apart was because General Smedley, being a patriot, basically started to expose all these plans, and it just started falling apart. Interestingly, George Bush's grandfather was one of the people that Smedley had actually pointed out as one of the group members in charge of actually putting the coup together. And of course, when this thing started getting investigated, they're like, oh, surely someone like Mr. Bush, who runs one of the largest banking systems in the United States, surely he wouldn't be involved in some kind of coup. But that being said, one of the reasons why Adolf Hitler did so well in the early stages of World War II was, do you know what bank he used in the United States to fund his military operation?
It was connected with the Bushes, wasn't it?
It was the Bush banking empire that actually financed Adolf Hitler in the early stages of World War II. And the only reason that stopped was because FDR basically told Bush, he said, you either stop financing Adolf Hitler or you're going to spend the rest of your life in prison.
Yeah, in fact, he threatened them or enacted the Trading with the Enemies Act against them.
Correct.
That's what froze their activity, the funding.
Yep.
Yeah, and also getting back to Smedley, Smedley Butler, I think his name was. Yeah, he was quoted as saying that because I think he was the most highly decorated Marine at the time, and he said he fought in all these wars, and he said, I fought for big oil, I fought for United Fruit. War is a racket. He came out with it blatantly that all these wars were manufactured, manipulated for financial interest of the privileged group. So he became extremely cynical and realistic about how war is used to further the interest of a certain group of people. And I guess he was instrumental in stopping that coup. Now, will we have any similar figures next time around? I don't know. General Flynn, maybe, or one of those people that are being castigated now. I don't know.
That's a good point. But one of the things I've noticed these days is if you do actually call out those certain elite groups, all of a sudden there's an investigation on you. You're being accused of multiple crimes for just basically pointing out something that's an obvious, fact, like Hillary Clinton and her foundation.
Yeah. As a matter of fact, we were talking earlier about something that Hillary pulled with. What was it that we were mentioning?
The uranium mine.
Yeah, tell us about that. That's interesting. Now, keep in mind in the big picture, Hillary is one of the ones pushing this Russian collusion thing involving Trump. But actually, what she was doing behind the scenes was colluding in what way?
That's exactly right. And we'll probably never really know what the true collusion is, because I have a feeling the real evidence of the collusion is on the 30,000 missing emails that was on her phone that they accidentally bleached.
Yeah, accidentally.
Yeah. But here's the funny thing about it. The United States is the only country in the world that has every natural resource in it. It may not have the most of everything, but it has every natural resource that you can think of. Russia, ironically, has no uranium in its country. It has to import all of its uranium. Why in the world would the United States give uranium to the second largest nuclear power in the world when you can cut off their uranium? If the United States had really wanted to, they could have stopped shipping uranium to Russia 50 years ago, and Russia would have virtually no nuclear missiles.
Oh, so what was the deal with Hillary? How did she affect that?
She basically negotiated the deal, and she has that foundation set up, and foundations are really basically just ways to basically hide money from the secretly hide money from its true origin. We really won't know how she actually benefited from it. We just know she did it. She had to benefit because she traded commodity futures one time, all that kind of stuff. Of course, they left the White House, completely broke, but that's another story. But in those emails, I think that's the reason why those emails got destroyed, is there's hard evidence that she basically was a traitor to the United States, and that's why the phone got destroyed with all the lost emails.
All right, now, again, to simplify it, she arranged for a deal by which the U.S. sold uranium to Russia. Now, this was an official transaction or one of her private ones? How did it work?
Well, I think what she did is basically for the United States to sell uranium to for the United States to sell uranium to Russia, for Russia to buy an interest in a uranium company in the United States, it has to get government approval. Uranium is one of those materials that you can't sell without government approval. Right. I think she used her her power, her influence, and the current position as Secretary of State to basically negotiate a deal with the guys that actually have to sign off on that. And in return, I'm sure she got something in some form or fashion, which we don't know, but she basically used her power to influence the signers to approve the deal.
I mean, was the U.S. officially selling it, or was her something she was involved with privately selling it?
Well, no, the actual uranium is actually an ownership stake in a uranium company. So basically, the company in the United States that actually owned the uranium mines, they sold I think it was like a 50% interest of the company to Russia. So now Russia actually has legitimate legal claims to uranium mines in the United States.
Just incredible. This is getting back to my point that these special interests and the gigantic multinational corporations and now social media, they become so huge and so powerful and so connected with the politicians, that they both exchange interest with each other. One hand rubs the other. That it seems to me it's increasingly difficult, if not impossible now, to break that stranglehold. Now you could compare it with Roosevelt coming in the 1930s after the crash and the Great Depression, and he forced a lot of this legislation through. So, and those were powerful special interests back then as well. But haven't they become even more powerful now and more pervasive and more interconnected with business?
Not only have they become more powerful, they've actually found new ways to prevent people from finding what they're doing. I'm sure you've seen places like Google, Facebook. They go to great odds to suppress information that people should actually get out there. I'll give you a perfect example. If you go to Google.com and you type in global warming hoax, you really won't find a lot of information using the Google search engine on global warming or the hoaxes or the global warming fraud. You go to a website called DuckDuckGo, which DuckDuckGo's website is purely out there to bring the information to you, no matter how bad or how good it is. Its job is to basically bring you uncensored information. You go in and type global warming hoax on DuckDuckGo, you'll find tons of articles written by PhDs, scientists, that specialize in global warming, and they will tell you and show you laid out in scientific documents on why global warming is just a hoax. It doesn't really exist.
And what's the website again?
It's DuckDuckGo.
Spell that.
Duck, D-U-C-K, go, G-O, D-U-C-K, go. Okay. It's a search engine. DuckDuckGo.
Yeah. Yeah, well, I mean, that's another thing. The control of information. We're already well on our way to state news, like in 1984, where the only narrative, the only information, the only reality that people were being fed was state approved. And with social media now on board with the politicians in power, that's getting worse and worse. So again, chances are becoming increasingly remote that we could break through this. Now you're saying, when the crash comes and people become desperate enough and angry enough, they'll put new leaders in. But will they have the wherewithal to do that? Because everything is so in control now by money and this new technology that wasn't even dreamt of in Hitler's Germany in the novel 1984. I mean, the technology controls everything now. So don't you see it increasingly remote that as a possibility that this stranglehold could be broken because of what's going to happen during the next Great Depression, which is 7 or 8 years away?
It's going to be extremely, extremely difficult. You're going to have to get people in a desperation. You're going to have to get people really angry, and you're going to have to upset the current status quo of the political system. To kind of give you kind of an idea, you basically saw a little bit when Donald Trump came into office, you saw a little bit of the people wanting to actually change how the elitist groups actually run things. And the elitist groups basically suppressed Donald Trump, impeached twice. I mean, on stuff that was just, stupid stuff. Stuff that had no real basis for impeachment. You had you had all these websites, censoring them and all that kind of stuff. And even then, we could get on some of the, some very fraudulent stuff that happened during the elections.
Right.
If Donald Trump, I'm sure you've seen what's currently going on in Atlanta, Georgia, in Fulton County, with the 50,000 ballots that have Joe Biden's oval marked in, and on the left-hand side of the oval, there's a little white dot in the oval on 50,000 of them. What does that tell you? That there was 50,000 copies of one ballot that was made, and that original ballot had a little speck or something on that oval, and it was copied 50,000 times. And there's currently lawsuits to get those ballots brought in front of a judge. And ironically, I'm sure you saw the videos in Fulton County where they started on the video cameras that showed after everybody went home, they started pulling out luggage and all that stuff from under the desk and all that stuff. And people started counting without GOP representatives there. Is it a coincidence that those same 50,000 ballots that have the little white dot in the ovals came from that very exact same office?
Yeah, but you see, Mark, again, the lawsuits had already been filed, some 60 of them. And the ones that are being filed now, I think they have a little chance of success because what they do is they dismiss them out of hand through legal maneuvers such as a lack of standing or a moot point or timing, et cetera, et cetera. So they're going to continue to do this. So the evidence that's there can never be examined. All these cases that were struck down, including the Supreme Court, some people don't realize this. It wasn't dismissed out of any kind of legal merit that was articulated. They were just dismissed out of hand, and that evidence was never looked at. People think, well, the courts have looked at the evidence and saw that there was nothing there. The evidence was never looked at. The cases didn't get that far. So what's going to break that pattern? It's going to be more of the same.
And that's exactly right. And that's the one thing that really irritates me about the case that went in front of the Supreme Court is the Supreme Court can dismiss a case on two things, either by standing or by merit. So if you and I bring a case to the Supreme Court, they can easily dismiss it on standing because we have no reason to even be there in the first place. Right. But when two states sue each other, the Constitution says, since it's two states, not individuals, states under the Constitution automatically have standing. So with the Supreme Court saying they didn't have standing, that's incorrect because the Constitution automatically gives them standing no matter what. The only way you could dismiss that case is to say it doesn't have merit. And this is where the problem comes in at. If the Supreme Court says it doesn't have merit, you have to write up the part of the Constitution that specifically says it doesn't have merit to justify that. Well, in the Constitution, it says state governments control elections, not the federal government. So right there alone, these people that basically changed the laws that weren't part of the actual legislature in the states, like, in Georgia, Wisconsin, Nevada, Arizona, those state representatives that changed, that bypassed the laws, those votes automatically are not valid under the law.
However, the Supreme Court said, so what? So the Supreme Court strikes it down. Where do you go from there? There's nowhere to go.
You don't, and that's what's going to probably irritate people in the future. And this is also a thing. A lot of people have just become scared. I'm sure there was probably discussion among Supreme Court justices that they didn't want eggs thrown at their front door of their houses. They didn't want people stalking their children or threatening to kidnap them. And so the easy way out was that they took the easy way out.
Yeah.
But so many people do these days.
But again, I don't think that they're any more likely now to do the right thing or to reverse what they've already done. So again, stops at the Supreme Court.
But there are people out there that try. The one thing you have to admire Donald Trump on the most is he tried to stand up against the system. He wasn't afraid to shake the tree and shake it hard.
Right. Right. Yeah, I mean, what he was an outside agitator, so to speak, shaking up the system, and that was his real value. No matter what people thought of him personally, they didn't like his style, they didn't like his braggadocio, his vulgarity. He was shaking up the system, and that's why I think they pulled out all the stops to make sure they got him out of office in the 2020 election. And now they're pouring it on more with lawsuits, investigations. to make sure he doesn't have a comeback. That's what they're trying to do.
And that's also, kind of what I think, if you had to label a downfall of Donald Trump, it was, I guess he just got irritated on stuff. When you're the CEO of a company and you're 100% owner of that company and you say, I want to do this, it gets done because you are the boss.
Right.
But as a president, you go in there and you say, I want to do this. And you've got 500 people saying you can't do that unless you can get 51% of those 500 people to agree with you. And automatically 50% of those people don't like you because you're not part of the group.
Yeah. Well, another thing is he came in with a big disadvantage of not knowing Washington and its ways, and he knew it generally, but he didn't know which players he could trust and which ones were plants, which ones were trying to undermine him. And so he didn't have really a loyal, sincere, well-intentioned group generally to work with. His own party was working against him.
Correct. And I think that's what's really got people the most scared, is because I kind of always view it, the first 4 years of president, it's kind of your 4 years of training. You're kind of learning the ropes and stuff, because in your second, fourth year, your second term, one, you don't have to worry about being reelected. So you can really take the gloves off and throw punches then. Right. And by then you've also learned how the system works to know how to really stab it. I think a lot of people are really scared that Donald Trump might run again and win. And win, knowing that this time you take the gloves off and you just don't punch somebody, you just knock the living daylights out of them.
Well, that's why Letitia James, the Attorney General of New York, is going after him now with a criminal investigation. And many people say she's actually going to indict Donald Trump because they want to make sure he doesn't come back.
I don't see how that can even hold water when she basically ran on a platform of saying, elect me as your DA and I will basically send Donald Trump to prison. She's already done what a lawyer should do. She's already passed sentence before any evidence has even been passed. How can that even hold water in a court?
Yeah, she should recuse herself because she's already sullied her efforts. She's not a disinterested party. But she says no, she doesn't have to recuse herself. And that's going on also with, I don't know, you're probably familiar with another Southern guy, a lawyer, Lynn Wood, who's been fighting this all the time. And he's been knocked around by all the judges down there where he's from in Georgia. And he can't get anywhere. And he's an excellent lawyer. But, they've got it stacked against him. Another one is Sidney Powell, who's been fighting and filing lawsuits, but not getting anywhere with it. So again, I don't know what's really going to break open this collusion.
And that's another great point. Both of those lawyers, if you look beyond what's been said on, CNN and everything with the Trump evidence or the Trump stories, these two lawyers here in the past year, CNN and MSNBC try to make these people look like idiots. Right. But if you look at their resumes going back over the last 10 to 15 years, these are some of the best lawyers in the industry.
Well, as a matter of fact, what is a guy who got a $200 million settlement from CNN for their for their disparagement of that kid Sandman, who was accused of being a bigot and racist and all that about when the Indian was beating the drum in his face. So, and he's taken on other cases like this. I mean, he really has the skills, but it's irrelevant because the inner circle is against him and they control the courts. So no matter how right he is legally, they just say, so what? They'll come up with some ridiculous excuse. And since they're the judge, they're the prosecutor, their officials, their word goes, whether it's correct or not, even if it's obviously a fix, they get away with it because they're holding the office.
That's also the funny thing is, with all this stuff happening, with people seeing how people are going after Donald Trump and all that stuff, I've had some of my, I have a few liberal friends, believe it or not. Some of my liberal friends said, what's going on with this stuff with the election fraud and all that kind of stuff, there's some things that just aren't making sense to me. And I find that interesting that you have some fairly diehard liberals that are actually admitting to me there's something that just doesn't sound right.
Yeah.
And, will it change their minds? Maybe not today, but if it keeps on continuing, maybe some of my liberal friends won't be as liberal down the road when they realize they're really being scammed.
Well, I'm in Pennsylvania, in the Scranton area. And by the way, Pennsylvania was one of the states where the governor and a few other and the Supreme Court of Pennsylvania changed the election laws. It didn't go through the state legislature, which was Republican controlled, as the Constitution of Pennsylvania said it should have. But again, they got away with it, and they're not getting anywhere in changing that around. So again, they control all the positions of power, which brings me up, by the way, to the influence of George Soros, who's been funding the campaigns of a lot of these radical, progressive, woke officials that are now in positions of power as prosecutors, et cetera, et cetera. So, with this kind of a thrust, is there a larger game afoot here? Is it this being coordinated by some bigger picture? And this brings me into something that I don't know how you feel about it, but a lot of people I talk with are more and more on board with at least perhaps the theory of a new world order, that there is an organization behind this pulling the strings globally. And we see what's going on in the US, what's going on in other countries, how they're, cancel culture, bringing in a renewal, neo-Marxism, et cetera, et cetera. So do you see a broad pattern that could be attributed to something that some people call the New World Order?
I don't think there's such thing as a new world order where there's a bunch of people sitting around, kind of like, when the Empire of Evil with, Justice League, a bunch of people sitting around a table planning this stuff out. What I really think that the group that these people are in is really the organization of just greed. Right. They all have a hidden agenda on how to put the most money and the most power in their pocket. And the easiest way to do this is to go in that direction of doing XYZ or ABC, but it's not a group that actually is planning on a new world order. It's just simply they want more money and power, and this is just a path to get there.
Yeah, this is the argument I have with especially a good acquaintance of mine who feels it's an ancient organization that has continued through the centuries in controlling the world, and it's an extension of that. And I argue back that what I see is that it's just the confluence of special interests, which we've had in every generation. So it keeps, players keep changing, but the special interests are always there. So it's not one ancient, organized, nefarious, evil organization for world domination. It's just a bunch of rich people who control things because they're rich. And you have that, you always have that.
Yeah, they just simply want more, or they want to protect what they have even more. Another interesting, we'll hit Warren Buffett here for a second. Warren Buffett, owns Clayton Homes, which is the largest mobile home maker, through Berkshire Hathaway is the largest mobile home maker in the United States. Yeah. He also owns a mortgage company that actually caters to giving mortgages to illegal aliens. So illegal aliens are one of the largest consumers of these mobile homes, and they go through which Clayton, and then they have the mortgage company. That Buffett is more than happy to basically give them a mortgage to get their mobile home through. And this is the funny thing is, and there's been studies on this or written up stuff on it. Warren Buffett's mortgage company charges these illegal immigrants 13, 14, 15% interest rates for these Clayton homes. The mortgages are completely written in English, so these people that can't speak a word of English sign these documents. And lo and behold, there's even been a study on it. If somebody finally gets the cojones to file a lawsuit against Warren Buffett and these illegal predatory pricing, ICE shows up at their door the same week and deports them back to the country they came from. And the lawsuit against Warren Buffett is now null and void.
Well, Mark, that's just good business. I mean, that's what made America
great. That's
good
business. That's really good business.
Anyway, actually, Mike, who is my is a technician, he's asking you to look on a dollar bill and explain that Eye of Iris on the back of the dollar bill in the pyramid.
On the
Doesn't that
pyramid.
doesn't that suggest a new world order, and also kind of channeled through an organization which I'm not sure if you've ever heard of, but the Masons.
Yes, I have heard some things about the Masons. Um, Now, I don't think like the thing with the pyramid and the eye over it. I don't think that's I don't think that's any like certain group. I think it's just a person that may have been a member of the group or thought that's a really cool symbol to put that on there. You know, the founding fathers were very mysterious. They like to keep people thinking. They like to keep people on their toes and stuff. And if you could put something out there that created mystery or suspense, they were all about that, because if you can create mystery and suspense over on your left hand, well, that leaves the right hand to do a lot more things with.
And what is written on the back of the dollar bill? Anything there that suggests some kind of an evil conspiratorial organization?
You're talking about the what is it? Latin novo extra something. That means I forget what it means, but yeah, if you draw the star inside of it, it actually spells out Masons.
Yeah, and that Latin inscription is basically New World Order.
Correct, it is.
So therefore, again, I don't know if you're familiar with any Masons, but you know, if you run into any of them, do they strike you as kind of an evil lot?
No, I don't think any of them are evil or anything. they're just a bunch of good old boys that try to do good stuff.
They just sit around and they do charitable work and all that.
That and other things.
Other things? What might those other things be, Mark?
I wouldn't know.
Well, I'm sure, being as interested you are in the state of the world, that you'll be investigating this and reporting back to us.
I will be doing that.
Okay, Mark Collinsworth, that's enough for this session. Thoroughly enjoyed it, and
Good.
and as the stock market does whatever it does, we'll be talking again with you. Mark Collinsworth of Vere Capital, thank you very much for joining us.
Thank you very much. Enjoyed it.